Do you miss the dreg exploding glory of the Firefly perk, but always wished it could be on an SMG? Or maybe you love the nuance to modding and progression in Warframe, but the game is 10 years old now, and there's enough systems stacked on top of systems that scientists could study the strata as a geological record. First Descendant solves both of these problems, while delivering a solid moment-to-moment gameplay loop in a looter shooter. Of course, creates some problems of its own too, but we'll get into that a bit later. I'm not going to factor server issues at launch into the overall opinion. Commonplace enough to have issues like this for games in the live service hellscape we occupy that it's part of the free-to-play price of admission. And when something launches without incident, that's what's noteworthy. We're going to stay as spoiler-free as possible here, but since we'll be talking about the overall experience and how the systems interact with one another as well as your experience of the game, some of that's unavoidable. If that bothers you, dip out after the TLDR segment, but leave a comment saying so if you do, because engagement. The main question here is the First Descendant worth spending a few dozen hours playing and potentially coaxing your wallet into being a bit frisky, if it likes how it feels? Okay, TLDR crew, gather round. Yes, with an asterisk. The characters all have their own flavor, with meaningful diversity of playstyle and clear paths to progression, while developing the power fantasy but keeping you appropriately challenged along the way. Weapons and abilities feel good to use, by and large, and I rarely found myself going, meh, that's bad or unfun when pushing a button. Enemy variation is decent enough for a looter shooter, loot is prolific, and each zone feels distinct. It's Unreal Engine 5, so it's pretty and runs well enough. While the Destiny Patrol-style missions in the overworld may not be everyone's cup of tea, I think it works quite well with the casual nature of the drop-in-and-out multiplayer. Bosses, the Colossi, not the dungeon, are varied, challenging without being unfair, mostly. And the entire experience is backed up by a crafting and progression treadmill that really makes sense once you meet the game on its terms. Now, here's that asterisk I mentioned. I think that last bit is where people will go wrong with the game. Obvious parallels to Destiny and Warframe exist, but it would be a mistake to approach it like it's either of those games. Play the game that it is, flaws and all, or decide that it's not for you, but you don't get to refuse to play on the game's terms and then complain about what it's not. Overall, if I wasn't making this video, it lives squarely in the spend $20 for some convenience and stretch that as far as I can bucket. Worth playing, worth enjoying, worth putting down once it hits your individual level of frustration with the grind or monetization structure. Is that worth it to you? At recording, I've put a bit over 25 hours into the game on PC. I'm its own 7 out of 8. I've started into what could be considered the endgame gameplay loop treadmill. I've unlocked and tinkered with a few of the Descendants after crafting. Most of my time has been spent on Ajax, largely because I really miss my Striker Titan with the Hawk Moon and the Daft Punk helmet, and he feels eerily close to that when you rock a hand cannon. I'm a fan. One thing that needs to be said on this section, I play on PC. I hear the PS5 version has some pretty significant performance issues on launch, but I can't verify that personally. Graphics aren't at the top of my priority list, but do bear a quick overview here, as nothing kills the moment more than poor performance, and well, there's no little blue pill for your graphics card. I'm running a 12th gen mid-grade i9 and a 3080. Full specs below for the nerds. When I was not recording, I stayed over 100 FPS on Ultra in all but the busiest scenes, and everything you're seeing here is on high since I had to knock it down a peg to maintain the frame rate while capturing. Goes without saying, motion blur and post-processing were turned off or as low as possible because just no. There's not much to say here, honestly. It runs well, reasonably pretty. The environments look cool and are immersive. Solid out of 10. Sound design has weight and diversity. Weapons sound like you'd expect, based on their archetype while maintaining chonkiness. The English VO for the story, it does lean a bit on the grating side for me, but that's personal preference more than anything. One cool thing that the First Descendant does that I wish more devs would consider is the audio ducking during gameplay. It's such a small thing comparatively, but not needing to strain over gunshots to hear dialogue or directions is something I really appreciate. From what I've experienced, your core gameplay loop looks something like this. Play through the story once to unlock systems, so you can learn how the game works at a reasonable pace instead of jumping in the deep end, needing to figure it out all at once. Run missions, operations, bosses, and events to farm upgrades, drops, and materials. Dismantle extra loot for crafting materials. There is so much dismantling, just all the dismantling. Use crafting materials to upgrade existing weapons, mods, and descendants, or build new ones as you collect unique pieces and recipes. And now that you're incrementally stronger, Monster Hunter loop time, go run incrementally harder content until that Descendants builds are complete, or you get bored and want to try a different playstyle. If you played Warframe, much of the account and character progression will make perfect sense. If you haven't, there's a bit of a learning curve, but you have the benefit of not needing to learn 10 years worth of systems. Short version goes something like this. Your account gains XP from leveling Descendants and weapon archetypes. For example, all the different flavors of SMG are unique archetypes. Your account level gives you benefits across Descendants, like increased mod space and extra storage, as well as access to more upgrade paths and systems in the game. Since the game is about grind, let me just take a second here to say, holy shit, the in-game wiki, codex, journal, whatever you want to call it, is amazing. Being able to see precisely what I need to craft a thing, and then see where that material drops without having to leave the game, is amazing. I know it seems like such a comparatively small thing, but the quality of life reward here is disproportionately large. 10 out of 10. To other devs, take notes. This is the bar now. Let's get into some of those problems that the First Descendant creates for itself here. First off, and perhaps the most obvious depending upon where you are in the game, come on now. Y'all can be more creative than shoot 3 balls. Now shoot 3 balls in the order they spawned. Now shoot 3 balls at the same time. Oh, now we're gonna mix it up. Shoot 4 balls. Mwahahaha. It's interesting for the first 10 or 15 encounters, but real tedious after that. Hard mode lacking matchmaking is a major turnoff for me. I get it, having players go to third-party apps like Discord to continue progression leads to increased overall investment into the game, and people who feel more invested are likely to play longer and spend more. We'll see how this goes long-term, but I do question the game's longevity for a majority of the player base if it stays the way it is. Battle chatter can get to be a bit much and repetitive at times, especially in the early levels with everyone running Bunny because the story basically gives her to you for free. Some of her callouts, I think, kind of sound like an Overwatch streamer cranky about their skill issues. Module upgrades seem like there have several copies of each mod with varying steps of upgrade due to how limited the overall capacity is without the expanders for things like your Descendant. Annoying, yes, but does mirror what I did in Warframe before hitting that power curve inflection point where you basically get to stop caring about the restrictions of the systems in the game. At times, I found myself having a ugh moment looking at the farm inherent to max out a Descendant or ultimate weapon. Just, yeah, it's a lot. I think if you target farm in this game, it has a very high potential to drive you mad. It does seem like rotating through, playing the game with a broad stroke approach of farming a few things at once has a bit more legs and sustainability because you're not running the same mission over and over and over and over hoping for a 3% drop. It sort of makes your enjoyment of the gameplay loop the goal while also getting incremental progression, instead of tying your enjoyment exclusively to number go up. All right, on to the elephant in the room, shall we? So yeah, it's an Exxon game. Pay-to-skip mechanics will tax you pretty hard if you're impatient or have offended RNGesus at some point in time in your life. I'm not going to defend Nexon at all here, until they prove their days manipulating drop rates to encourage whaling so severely that they were fined are well and truly behind them. Right now, the internet is clamoring about single-use armor dyes and items to expand your mod capacity on each Descendant, and I've seen some creators complain about mobile game mechanics to accelerate crafting while they're at the same time singing Warframe's praises, which also have those mechanics, which is a bit of a whoosh moment there. Cosmetics are largely irrelevant to me. My Orbiter in Warframe was still the default gray after 10 years, right up until my spouse refused to party with me until I changed it. That said, I can absolutely appreciate that others say they're too expensive when contrasted with the other players in the space. I am concerned, though, about the price on reactors to expand mod space on your Descendants, though I feel that players may be missing the point here a little bit, in that you'll only ever need as many of those as there are Descendants, and you can, with the grind, of course, craft them with time instead of your wallet. For comparable items in Warframe, for example, it makes you wait for limited time events, although they are far more plentiful for free-to-play people now than they used to be. At the end of the day, each of us has a threshold of what we consider reasonable monetization. I've probably spent a couple $100 on Warframe over my time with it since it was invite only. Still pixels I don't really own, but that seems like a fair trade for the literal thousands of hours of entertainment and friends I've made while playing. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to start splashing cash at Nexon. I learned that lesson hard with Vindictus. If they show they can be reasonable, I don't mind spending a reasonable amount. It's not like this is a PvP-centric game after all. People buying power doesn't negatively impact your experience of the game unless you fall victim to comparative thinking. For that, I might suggest some introspection or meeting with a counselor. Wrapping things up here, it's not a perfect game. None are. Overall, I like it. The core gameplay loop feels good. Frankly, I'm surprised that's not more of a consideration for more people. If you don't enjoy the thing that makes up the majority of the game, why are you playing it? For me, I've had a Destiny and Warframe-shaped hole in my heart ever since Destiny 2 went weird after launch, and Warframe became both bloated under the density of layered systems and too easy once you hit a critical inflection point of progression. I don't know yet how long I'll keep playing the First Descendant. That depends largely on just how gnarly the grind turns out to be, and what sort of absurd caricature of gatekeeping the community becomes at endgame. People forget the genre is grindy by design. You don't need to have everything maxed as soon as possible, and once you finish that checklist, what's left? Cool. You marked off another task on your hobby chore list. Weird way to approach something that's meant to be fun. For now, though, when I meet the game on the game's terms, it is what I need it to be. That's a competent looter shooter that feels good to play without becoming the overly attached significant other who forces you to stop hanging out with your other friends because they want to monopolize all of your time. I've been BaldSquid. See you next time.